And now for a story about the places your tax dollars go to. It turns out the federal government has spent thousands of dollars to organize shows where seniors from other countries recount their sexual experiences, including their first time, their best time, their worst time, and their last time. The bill for this all has come to $12,000 for the Kinky Funding Initiative. The show is called All the Sex I've Ever Had and was created in 2010 by a Toronto-based arts group. And now many are calling on the government to explain how Canadian tax dollars were used to fund sex stories from seniors in other countries. Among those people asking for answers is Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Hi, Franco. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
I guess this just seems like a story that your group would be all over, right? Money for sex shows, but this is, I guess, a more outlandish one. Well, what's your take on this?
Well, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I think when Canadian parents tell their kids to listen to their elders, I don't think that this is what they're talking about. I mean, look, we're not just paying seniors to tell their sex stories. We're outsourcing our sex stories abroad. We spent more than $12,000 on performing with seniors performing in front of live audiences, essentially retelling their sexual histories. These shows took place in Taiwan, in Australia, and in Austria, and it's all funded through a little-known slush fund that Global Affairs Canada has called the Mission Cultural Fund. So it's been funding these senior sex stories all across the world, and of course, they've been using our tax dollars to do it.
So, Franco, you know what? I'm going to disagree with you on this. You know, I look at the great countries in the world, the countries where people want to go. And you know what? Part of government funding goes to the arts. It's what makes Canada, the U.S., Europe, the West. What makes it great is that we spend money on the arts. And, you know, it's not like some shows are not for everyone, but I think that's what's great. And if it's $12,000, you know what? If it gives seniors a good time and allows for a good show for some people, why not?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously I disagree with that. This also isn't the first time that we've been funding these types of sex shows. So let me just put 2 points here. I mean, first of all, I understand your point about in the grand scheme of things, this is really a big cost. But the problem is that this isn't the only time that we've seen the Mission Cultural Fund spend money like this, especially at a time when the government is more than $1 trillion in debt. Our obvious question is, you know, maybe we set aside the sex shows for a minute until the government pays down that $1 trillion debt. But as I said, right, this isn't the only time we've seen money from this fund going to things like this. Back in 2019, I believe, we spent more than $8,800 on a sex toy show in Germany. And look, I understand your argument about the arts, but especially when it comes to topics like this, with the money like this, if you want to fund your own sex shows, by all means, go ahead. I just don't think that you should be relying on Canadian taxpayers to foot the bill.
So is your big problem, because you keep saying the word sex, so is the problem that it's a sex show?
No, the problem is that they're using Canadian tax dollars to fund sex shows around the world. And even by the Mission Cultural Fund's own standards, the Mission Cultural Fund is around to promote Canada and to promote our foreign policy initiatives. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, how is this doing either? And also, too, right, this isn't on taxpayers. The onus shouldn't be on taxpayers to be like, hey, how is this helping our foreign policy initiatives? No, the onus should be on the government to clearly explain to Canadian taxpayers how funding sex toy shows or sex story shows around the world is helping our foreign policy initiatives. Like, even just saying that sentence out loud makes me laugh.
Okay, so, listen, I'll get your point on at a time when there's so much spending, maybe Global Affairs Canada should cut the fat in certain places. And I can get the argument, okay, here's one thing that maybe it's spending that doesn't need to happen. But on the notion of government spending on the arts, where does your group lie?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, for the most part, we would rather use the private sector, whether it's through charitable donations or whether it's just the private sector funding the arts. I mean, look at this. Another thing that we have to talk about here is also what this money has been going towards. Let's set aside the sex shows for a second here. I know we can get back to that in a moment, but we've also used this Mission Cultural Fund to help a famous author, Margaret Atwood, to promote her new book in Australia. We've used this to fund famous cartoonist Lyndon Johnston's work in Washington for her to promote that. So we're talking about adding all this up, tens of thousands of dollars, funding famous Canadians to promote their stuff around the world. This to me doesn't sound like a priority for Canadian taxpayers. And I can understand if each individual has their own individual preferences, but I don't think there is a sound argument to say that this should be a priority for the use of Canadian taxpayers' money.
We're with Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So Franco, listen, I'm someone that hates when I see waste, government waste, especially when we all have to pay for it when there's government waste. I see it. But I still get to the point of, at the end of the day, because you don't want governments, the last thing you want is governments deciding what art gets funded, what art doesn't. You got to give it to groups, and then they'll make those editorial decisions. Sometimes you'll end up with things that you just don't like. And, a sex show in Germany, you'd be like, oh, God, are we really spending money on that? But I think the alternative is far worse. Like, I'm looking at what are the alternatives? And a government that doesn't support the arts, far worse alternative. A government that supports the arts but now gets to choose, far worse. I don't know. I think, Franco, this you know what? I think it's a no-brainer for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to actually be in favor of this type of spending because it shows you why we're so great.
No, I don't think that us funding seniors around the world with tax dollars to talk about their first time, best time, worst time, last time is why Canada is so great. So I think we just fundamentally disagree on this. Mm-hmm. And also, too, I think there should be political oversight, right? I don't think bureaucrats should just be running around making these types of decisions without actually going back to the taxpayer and explaining how in the world this is helping our foreign policy initiatives or really helping to promote Canada abroad. I just don't see it. We're completely against it.
But isn't it peanuts at the end of, percentage-wise? It's less than pennies in a dollar, right?
Well, no, I don't think we should look at it that way for a couple of reasons. This one, we're talking about $12,500 to be going to funding these sex story shows abroad. That money, I know so many people who are struggling right now who I'd rather see them get the money or to be able to keep their own money than this. But also, too, when we say, hey, it's just a little bit, it's just a little thing, well, the problem is the little things snowball into the big things. And then we're left at a stage where we are now, where the deficit is in the range of the $40 billion, where the debt is in the range of more than $1 trillion. So when you let the little things leave the microscope, you get these really big problems that we're seeing today.
Franco, I think it varies by province, but let's say here in Quebec, right? If you build some sort of public infrastructure project, let's say you build a hospital, there's a percentage that needs to be set aside for public art in those public spaces. And I think about visits to hospitals where I'm just struck by a piece of artwork, and maybe I'll spend 10 seconds looking at it, and then I go on with my day. And I think there's a value to that in the public. What do you think on that end? Isn't there a value, whether it's public art or it's a show like this? Doesn't the taxpayer win just a little bit? Don't they get something? There's so many things where you say, oh, what did the taxpayer get out of that? Isn't this an example, whether it's artwork or shows, where the public actually got something for their money?
Well, okay, two things. We're not talking about art beside a hospital. We're talking about hand-picked seniors in places like Taiwan who essentially are being funded by Canadian taxpayers' money to talk about their sex lives, right? We're not talking about the same thing. But then even when it comes to the public art projects that you're talking about, I'll just bring up a specific because I'm from Calgary. They have a similar rule like that. And one of the things that they ended up doing is spending $470,000 for a big blue ring. No, taxpayers don't get any value for that type of money. And we've seen even counselors in Calgary speak out against that type of stuff. Actually, one of the issues with these hard rules around public art and capital projects is that rather than actually funding things that are priorities, these rules force the government to just put up public art, to just waste money because that's what the rules say.
Franco, listen, I think it's a great discussion. I think it's a good debate to be had here. I'll still take our way, over the alternatives. Great discussion, Franco. And by the way, thanks for always fighting for taxpayers, even if we disagree from time to time.
No, these conversations are fun, and thank you so much for having me on your show today.
That's Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.